Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. We're on the lovely Poker Beach website today because we're going to be looking at our first impressions for the SM10 Double Blaze cards that were revealed about a week ago now. So I've had a decent amount of time to compress my thoughts and get a good look at these cards, and now I can give you my initial reaction. So I'm going to go down to the trainers to kick things off. First of all, before I start this video, shout out to OmniPal Peter at TPCI. I know you'll be watching, and thanks for your support. But let's get down to the trainers and talk about all these card inclusions. You'll be seeing that there are some trainer cards that are reprinted, the likes of Ultra Ball and Escape Rope here. These cards actually have the identifying letter A or B on them, which means they actually won't be adding to the cycle of them sort of being in play. So they're not going to extend their lifetime in rotation. So even though you're seeing some of these reprints, it does not mean that they're going to be around in the format for longer. So that's something I thought I would point out. But we're not going to go through the reprints because we know what these cards are all about. We'll be jumping to Zag Pickle for our first trainer card. This is what it looks like. I don't really know what it's all about, but you're able to look at the top 3 cards of either player's deck, choose one of them, and that player shuffles the other cards back into their deck, and then you put the top card of your choice on top of their deck, so or your deck, depending on which one it is. So it's similar to a Pokénav, but you're always never taking a card, unlike Pokénav that can get you a card straight away at times if it's a energy or a Pokemon. And you're not really rearranging the top 3 for like Acrobike synergies or anything like that. You're only interacting with one card ever. But it does help stack your deck a little bit for the top 3 cards to becoming the best one. So it has small synergies with Oranguru or Judge's Whistle, for example, to get you an ideal piece here or there. The added flexibility in comparison to Pokénav is that you're trying to sort out your opponent's deck and give them dead draws, basically. So maybe there is a place for a stalling deck that can just, lock your opponent out of supporter cards with maybe something like a Kabutops, and then you're using Zag Pickle to make sure that they're just drawing into dead cards, not extra energy cards, not extra, non-supporter draw cards, stuff like that. So I can see it being a card for one of these locking Kabutops decks, but not much else really. And I think it's still a little bit niche. You may just, if you're the Kabutops deck, accept the fact that they can have draws here and there, because you're not going to spam Zag Pickle very often unless you're the Kabutops player that's spamming your own supporters turn by turn. And the way the Kabutops deck works at the moment, it's very Jirachi based, and you use Jirachi to Stellar Wish a bunch early to get you into Kabutops, and then you just shove him into the active and pretty much just start attacking to win, or using Lusamine Loop in standard. Those are the 2 ways you try and do it. So this can be a trainer card that gives you some early game protection to improve, for example, your Jirachi draws and stuff like that, whilst also late game trying to deny the opponent. So has tiny synergy with something like Kabutops. That's the only real niche that I can see for this card initially. Other than that, it doesn't seem fantastic. Then we have some reprints, and we get the Fire Crystal Trainer card. This seems to be a very nice card. Obviously, the set is called Double Blaze. There's a lot of fire support that we gain from this set, this being one of them. It's an item card that says put 3 fire energy from your discard pile into your hand. So it's a buffed version of energy retrieval, but for specifically fire energy cards. This is obviously very good for recovering some fire energy into your hand. It has synergy with all sorts of these fire attackers that you'll see later down the line that need to have fire energy in hand. It can have synergy with things like the Flareon GX that can attach energies from hand. It can have synergy with the Ninetales that we saw in the previous set that can discard 2 fire energy from hand to do a gusting effect. So there's a lot of good things for the Fire Crystal, and there's some new stuff in Double Blaze as well that this will synergize really well with. There's the Salazzle that we have, there's the GX Pokemon Reshiram and Charizard. There's a lot of things that can take full use out of this Fire Crystal, even the Baby Blacephalon as well that we get in this set. Lots of good things for this card, so it seems to have great synergy with fire stuff. There's going to be a lot of discard interaction and hand interaction with energy from this set that you'll see from the Welder supporter as well. So this card is going to be seeing play in fire decks. They're going to pretty much be getting a big new coat of paint from this set with using the Welder and Fire Crystal engines, which sound pretty nutty, to be honest. Dusk Stone is a trainer item card that is very specific towards a couple evolutions, but is a really, really OP version of Evo Soda, essentially. So if you have a Pokemon in play that evolves into Mismagius, Honchkrow, Chandelure, or Aegislash, those 4 specifically, you get to search your deck for a card that evolves from that Pokemon, including a Pokemon GX, and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it. Then shuffle your deck. So it reads as Evo Soda, essentially, for those 4 things, but the added text at the bottom here, you can use this card during your first turn or on a Pokemon that was put into play this turn. So you're getting things rolling. If you're a Chandelure, you can go from Litwick, and then on your turn 2, you evolve into the middle evolution, the Lampent, and then you can use the Dusk Stone to go straight into Chandelure that turn. So it's a fast way of getting your stage 2s into play in the case of Chandelure and Aegislash, and it's a very fast way of getting Mismagius and Honchkrow into play. It's similar to things like Energy Evolution EVs that we've seen, and that's how you have to think about this card. For now, pre this set, there really aren't that many impressive evolutions for these 4 things. Mismagius, there is one in Standard that has Chaos Wheel. There's a Chandelure that can do some shady movement of damage counters, but that's not all that impressive. And Aegislash sometimes been a tech card in like tool drop decks, which really haven't kicked on too much. Just because it gives you a big buff of hit points. You have 140 HP and an ability that reduces 40 done to yourself. But overall, right now, there's nothing too impressive from these evolutions. There's also a Honchkrow that can do Raven's Claw, I think it's called, that does 10 plus 10 more for each damage counter on your opponent's side of the field. So they're all fairly underwhelming. There is a brand new Honchkrow and Mismagius from this set, which have some more promise, definitely the Honchkrow. And maybe that's where we're going to be seeing Dusk Stone come into play. For now, though, I feel like this card is excellent, and it's just lying in wait for, one of these Pokemon to come out and be very, very powerful. That's pretty much how I see it. Giovanni's Exile is an interesting new supporter card. It allows us to choose up to 2 of your bench Pokemon with no damage counters on them and discard those Pokemon and all cards attached to them. It feels like, in many ways, it's kind of strange. Why would you want to get rid of Pokemon that you've chosen to put down on your board, outside of some niche things where you get rid of Pokemon that hit the field, do an effect, and then do nothing afterwards? Think about things like Let Loose and Tapu Lele GX. You could use them early and then Giovanni's Exile them to free up your bench space, or to reuse those abilities like Let Loose and Lele all over again, or just simply not have a Lele on your board because it can be a liability. So there's some small synergies there with Giovanni's Exile. It definitely reminds me of something like the Weed Out Hydreigon deck can play. It can play like even Evo Shock Raichu. You're trying to spam those for Shock Lock, and then you're using Weed Out turn by turn from the Hydreigon. So Giovanni's Exile is a very similar effect to the Hydreigon deck, or sorry, the card that we've seen be used in Standard to try and spam some of these like one-drop evolution or basic abilities at times. Even using Giovanni's Exile, you could just use Distortion Door 2 times, exile your Giratinas, Distortion Door 2 more times. So it's a great way of doing a 40-40 snipe without doing any attacking. So there's some niche synergies with Giovanni's Exile. That's even before we talk about its introduction with the new cards from this set as well. So there's going to be some cute play for Giovanni. I think there are a few awkward things. You have to have no damage counters on your Pokemon, so if you're up against a spread deck, that's going to be very awkward for you, although there is a card in this set that can give you bench barrier. And also, it doesn't quite have the same synergy as maybe something like Acerola, where if your active took a hit, you could just retreat and exile it away afterwards. So they've obviously identified that that would be insane of a card, and it's safe on a Hydreigon because it's a stage 2, but it would be too powerful on a supporter. So that no damage counter sort of like clarification is really important for this card and how playable it becomes. But there are also some milling synergies that we have in this set for Giovanni's Exile, and in those decks I can foresee it having some play for sure. There's also a new Mewtwo in this set as well, which has great synergy for a card like this. So one to keep an eye out for when we discuss some other cards later down the line. But for right now, there's a few abilities already that you might want to start thinking about spamming, like the Giratina. Using Distortion Door is the one that comes to mind for me as being the most powerful, because if you're a deck that doesn't require lots of bench spaces, you can just spam Distortion Door a couple times and it's going to be pretty powerful for you for math fixing and such. So that sounds really good. We get the Fan Club reprint, and then here comes Welder. It's an excellent fire supporter card, really, really potent and powerful. It says, attach 2 fire energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon. If you do, draw 3 cards. So it's similar to a How, but it's kind of on steroids because you also get 2 attachments on top. Obviously, How is always playable, whereas Welder is technically not always playable because you always have to have the 2 fire energy in order to draw cards afterwards. But the fact that this is to one of your Pokemon, it means any Pokemon. It doesn't mean a basic, it doesn't mean a fire type. It has no stipulations. It's energy acceleration universally. Obviously being fire energy is the only restriction here, But being Fire Energy is great because we have the new Fire Crystal that we saw up here, and we also have Fiery Flint as well. So we have a multitude of ways of getting fire into our hand in the first place, and Welder then can give you energy acceleration, similar to the power of Blacksmith, but also getting to draw 3 cards in the process afterwards is so big for you, and it really is going to push on fire types. I think it's amazing for Blacephalon, amazing for the new Charizard Reshiram deck, and it's going to be, you know, supplementary to Kiawe turn 1, basically, sometimes. So I can foresee the fire decks just having pure Welder engines to give you extra energy acceleration throughout the game. Really, really powerful supporter cards, and I think this is going to be defining the new fire decks from the new Sun and Moon sets, basically. We then have Red's Challenge, another new supporter card. It allows you to discard 2 cards from your hand. If you do, search your deck for 1 card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So it pretty much reads as Pokemon, as Computer Search from Expanded, the A-Spec Trainer card. Now it's in the form of a supporter, and I think that's a little bit slow. Comp Search is obviously way high on the power level as an item card, obviously only being an A-Spec. Everyone would be playing it otherwise. But it feels like Red's Challenge is a little bit weak. I know we have Mallow already, and we have Smooth over Magcargo, so we have lots of ways that we can already kind of like stack cards to the top of our deck, and then we can use draw cards to get them all at once. And I think that has more credibility than the Red's Challenge will do. I don't foresee this card seeing a huge amount of play. It feels a little bit slow for me. It's kind of like a Skylar type effect, but more universal, but you're paying cards to get rid of them as well. So there are some discard synergies, of course, out there that can be relevant at times, but I think overall Red's Challenge is a little bit on the weaker side. Then we have the Fighting Dojo Stadium. The attacks of Pokemon with basic fighting energy attached, both yours and your opponents obviously, do 10 more damage. If there's a player with more prize cards remaining, the attacks of their Pokemon with basic fighting energy attached do 40 more damage instead. So the idea here is that hopefully you're the only one playing basic fighting energy. There'll be plenty of matchups where your opponent isn't playing basic fighting, obviously, and it's still a one-sided stadium in your favor. You're getting 10 extra damage buff, or you're getting 40 damage buff when you're behind. So it's like a Blacksmith. That was a previous supporter that we saw back in Heart Gold Soul Silver. Having that on a stadium is really big, especially because Fighting Dojo's 10 damage buff on some fighting cards already is going to be very helpful for tipping over some math. Going behind, especially in something like a Persian deck, you can definitely foresee Persian going behind. Getting that extra 40 damage is insane. One thing you have to note is that the stadium does not apply to Ultra Beasts, so they've covered their backs here. Baby Buzzwole and Buzzwole GX do not get way stronger off of this card. It's more towards the likes of Persian that I'm looking at this card and thinking, yeah, that could be a stadium that I can see working. Fighting decks already have the awesome Brooklet Hill Stadium, and it also has things like Shrine of Punishment sometimes at its disposal, but this Fighting Dojo is another one that we could consider if it's going to be perfect for math fixing just with the initial 10, and then having the huge upside of going behind and maybe the fear of people going ahead against you too early in the game, because the Dojo can give you a huge buff of damage, which is incredible, really. So, yeah, very, very strong card for decks using basic fightings. Actually, yeah, the Persian's actually not very good because you need basic fighting energy. Maybe it has to be some other cards. Seems pretty balanced overall. I can't actually think of too many cards that want to play this. Maybe like the new Dog Trio or Crabominable, something like that. Yeah, ignore the Persian comment because it's DCUs. Yeah, it needs to be basic fighting energy. Yeah, I've got to think about that some more. Maybe it's a little bit too niche for the cards we have in the set right now, because basically the main fighting cards we're using is like Lycanroc, Lucario, and then like Ultra Beast a lot of the time. So maybe it's just a card for Lucario or something like that. We could play a quad Lucario style deck with just Jirachis. Who knows? Dust Island is a new stadium. When a player switches their poisoned active Pokemon with the effect of a trainer card, their new active Pokemon is now poisoned. So essentially, if people are using, you know, a Switch or an Escape Rope or a Guzma as well, and they're trying to use those to get things out of poison, the new active is now poisoned. Overall, I think this is very, very weak. I would rather just have cards that make it harder for people to retreat, increasing their retreat cost and etc. If I was playing like a poison locking deck, overall I think people can just manually retreat out of poison anyway and get around it that way. So that's something to bear in mind, of course. Keeping some status around is going to be important because there is an Alolan Muck and Muck Tag Team GX card in this set. that is going to be based on poison. We do have Survivor, which can improve the damage of poison. So in theory, keeping more things poisoned overall is going to be a big deal. But I think the stadium is a little on the weak side, in my opinion. And then we have some reprints of Fiery Flint, Stretcher, Kiawe, Cynthia. And we come down to Triple Boost Energy, which is a pretty much reprint from what I can tell from the old Boost Energy from back in the day. I believe it was early EX era where this card came out. And it can only be attached to an evolved Pokemon, and you discard Triple Boost Energy at the end of your turn. But it provides 3 colorless energy as long as it's attached to a Pokemon. And giving yourself 3 energy in one turn is a big amount of energy just to get out of nowhere. I immediately look towards things like Nidoqueen that requires 3 colorless energy cards to attack. Aerodactyl as well from our previous set, 2 cards that are evolutions that can do big numbers, all off of 3 energy, and being able to just attach that one time, get that big burst of damage is going to be awesome. I think you really do mitigate the fact that it discards itself if you're playing non-GX cards, because they're naturally going to be knocked out, or you expect them to be knocked out much more often anyway. So the sort of downside of Triple Boost Energy is really mitigated a lot. And then there's, of course, Gardevoir GX that you could think about this card. Obviously, right now, Stage 2s aren't all that relevant in the format because of just the speed of things like Pikachu and Zekrom combined with Let Loose, which is very scary. Persephone also being a Let Loose kind of deck. But if there is ever a world where Stage 2s start coming back, Gardevoir, of course, getting an extra 90 damage that you can just pop on all at once feels very similar to a Super Boost Energy turn. So I can definitely foresee Gardevoir maybe even just taking out the double colorless energies altogether and going towards Triple Boost, because you just want to have the immediate damage now, take the knockouts, and if we're going to get return knocked out, we can just use Max Potion anyway and then go like Secret Spring, Triple Boost, attack again. Seems really powerful for me, so I think this card is going to be insane for some evolving decks. Providing that 3 colorless cost is going to be very, very powerful in some situations, so definitely a great card to have back in the format. And it's pushing evolutions, which I think is really relevant right now. Pokemon obviously making tag team GX Pokemon as like big basics. They're also giving us a lot of support and reason to be evolution decks as well, so big thumbs up from Pokemon reintroducing Triple Boost in the same era as lots of big basics to give you some incentive to play these evolution decks. I think that's really cool stuff. So let's jump all the way back up to the top and start looking at the Pokemon now that we have the knowledge of these new item cards that we have available. Starting off with the grass stuff, we have an Oddish that can paralyze, which is actually quite relevant now because Oddish is a relevant card in Standard currently. So having one that can use Stun Spore is definitely one to bear in mind. It might be the flagship Oddish, although it only has 50 hit points and not 60. There's a pretty interesting Gloom that has the ability Irresistible Scent. Once during a turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, your opponent reveals their hand. Put 1 basic Pokemon you find there onto your opponent's bench. Trying to force things into play is going to be really nice. Again, the theme of a Vileplume deck is going to be kind of stall-based a lot of the time. There's one in Expanded that has Item Lock. There's one in Standard which is able to stop basic Pokemon attacking. So using Gloom to put more things on the opponent's bench might work towards a stalling archetype where you just bring up more chunky things that they don't want to put into play in the first place, and you can try and stall them with the likes of counter catchers and such. So this Gloom may only be like a one-of because you're typically going to be based on rare candies, especially with like a Jirachi engine or a Ninetales engine that we saw Ross Cawthon playing recently. So it may not fit into a Vileplume in more than a 1 count, but it might just be like a one-off tech because it can give you or give your opponent a bit of a problem, because you also get the information of your opponent's hand. So it's like using a Team Skullgrunt before using Team Skullgrunt itself. So getting that free information on the coin flip of heads is already very good, even if they don't have basic Pokemon in their hand. And it again makes them sort of play more proactively, which is very good when you're playing a stalling deck because you want them to play cards against you. We get a new Vileplume. It has 140 hit points, a 3 retreat cost. The ability is Variety Pollen. Once during a turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, you may leave your opponent's active Pokemon either poisoned, burned, asleep, or confused. You choose one. This is really nice. The variety is very strong. One thing I know about Pokemon is that flexibility is always a good thing, because if you just want to have instant damage, Burn is going to give you plus 20, which is awesome. And if you're not taking a one-hit KO, going for something like Confusion or Sleep can really just make the opponent in an awkward spot. Obviously, confusion makes them have to retreat anyway a lot of the time if they want to get an attack off or flip a coin. So I like that this can help you push for one-hit KOs, and I like that it can help you when you're going for two-hit KOs. So I think this ability is nice. Obviously, it's on a coin flip, so it's not really reliable. But Vileplume is a pretty blessed line in the TCG at the moment. There's a lot of good Vileplumes around. So maybe this being like a one-of include just to have this ability at your side is no bad thing. So I like the option of Vileplume, and it's going to be one I think about playing in decks. Just because flipping for an extra 20 damage every turn sounds really good. And Burn is OP now that they've changed the rule for it. So yeah, pretty nice ability overall. Its attack does 90 and heal 30 from self for grass, colorless, so it feels like it's never an attacker, usually just here for its ability. Next up, we have a Venomoth. It has the Assassin Flight attack for 1 colorless. You can use this attack only if your opponent's active is affected by a special condition. This attack does 90 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, so maybe this is the kind of synergy card you're looking for with a Vileplume style deck. You flip a bunch of coins, try and confuse the active, and fire off some 90 snipes in the back the entire time. I think it's too cute of a deck to function, the Vileplume and the Venomoth. Even though you have things like Grovyle as a sort of engine to get all your grass dudes out, I think the 90 snipe, although powerful for 1 energy for certain, I think it's a little bit slow overall because you force yourself to have status conditions on the opponent's active, which the Vileplume and like Salazzle are only real ways that we can do that efficiently, and it doesn't sound too great. Its other attacks does 30 and poison, so it synergizes with itself, but it's a really weak attack. Moving on to our first Tag Team GX Pokemon, Reshiram and Charizard GX has 270 hit points, weak to water, has a retreat cost of 3, and comes with 3 very powerful attacks. The first, for a fighting colorless, is Outrage. This is a familiar attack. It does 30 plus 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. When you're a Pokemon that has 270 hit points, very often you're going to have a lot of dice on you at one time. This means that even though you're, not committing a bunch of energy to your Reshiram and Charizard, it's always a threat. If you've just gone turn 1 attach pass, your opponent is still very worried about trying to start approaching a 2-hit KO against a Reshiram and Charizard because it has so much burst potential with the Welder card that we've seen already, and also the fact that it can just simply go, oh, I guess I'll just attach an energy to the active and outrage you anyway. So I think that's very, very dangerous, something that we do need to bear in mind. This is going to be a very nice attack that we have on us. It means that we can be non-committal to our Reshiram and Charizard and still be a threat in the active position, which is very strong, especially when you're playing something like a Kiawe deck, because you set your stall out very early just by going, I guess I just Kiawe turn 1, and if your opponent obviously can't 1-hit KO 270 hit points very often without the help of weakness, it means that Outrage is always going to be there. It means we don't have to be spending our Flare Strikes and our Double Blaze GX attacks early. It means that we can just have the Outrage to fall back on. So that's a very, very nice opening attack for this card. Flare Strike for 3 fire and 1 colorless does 230 damage. That's a huge amount. And this Pokemon can't use Flare Strike during your next turn. Not really a bad downside at all. Normally you expect Fire Pokemon to just be removing all the energy from itself all the time. So the fact that you keep all the energy on yourself is really powerful. We've seen how some decks are going like Jirachi based and having escape boards and then a bunch of switch and ropes. This deck could be trying to do the same thing. If it's going for a Welder engine and you're using things like Fiery Flint and the Fire or the Red Crystal, I can't remember what it's called, the one that gets energy back for you, you could try and use it with Jirachi and just pivot in and out, and you can get that Flare Strike rolling. So that's just one easy way. Obviously, there's things like just Guzmering and stuff that we can get around this. It's similar to how we've seen Buzzwole have that awkward text on the attack, but it's never been too detrimental to the card overall. Then we get to its GX attack. For 3 fire, you have Double Blaze GX. Just does 200 damage. If this Pokemon has at least 3 extra fire attached to it, you do 100 more damage, and it's not affected by any effects of your opponent's active Pokemon. So 200 for 3 is already very efficient. I think that's the real selling point for this card, just because you can go attach Welder and do Double Blaze for 200. That's already like a key selling point of this card, because if you Double Blaze GX and then, next turn you can just attach and Flare Strike, that sounds very powerful. Or you can Double Blaze, and then if they hit into you, you can have Outrage and you can start attaching to the next Reshiram and Charizard. So I think that's a very, very powerful combination of attacks. I think the way to go up to an extra 100 is very difficult for fire decks. Obviously, you have Welder at your side, but I think it's a little bit more difficult than something like Full Blitz into Tag Bolt, because it's not going to be so easy for you to just do a bunch of energy switches just to get to the 300. And I also think the Tag Bolt GX attack is more worth chasing, because 170 to the bench as well as 200 active is much stronger than just doing 300 to the active. At the same time, though, this gives you a great way of one-shotting opposing tag team GXs. So 300 is a really good number to hit as well. And when we have the fire support, it's not out of our range. But in general, I can see people going for early Turbo Blazes a lot with this deck. So that's something to bear in mind. Really, really good damage output overall. I think we will be needing Choice Band to push this to KO. Zoroark's are the stage 1s, and then Flare Strike pushes it to knock out Pikaroms. So that's pretty interesting overall. In mirror match situations, you can't one-shot each other, which is quite weird, because you set the other person up for outrages. So the mirror match is going to be an interesting one to see how that goes. But overall, I think this is going to be a very powerful card just because of the fire support that we have, and the raw stats on this guy do seem very powerful. On to Growlithe and Arcanine. Arcanine has the Grand Flame attack for free fire. You do 120 and attach 2 fire energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. So again, this is just one of these cards. It would be really nothing special if you looked at this this set, but the fact that we have the Welder now, being able to Grand Flame and get even more attachments onto your board is something that we have to bear in mind. 140 hit points on the stage 1 is no bad thing. Overall, I think it's just not going to be quite good enough, but it's actually reasonable just because of the fact that it can reach 190 with its second attack as well, Heat Tackle. So one of these cards that would be entirely unimpressive that we have to look again at just because of the amount of fire support that we have from this set. We have Darumaka and Darmanitan. This can search your deck for fire energy cards to put them straight to your hand, but that's definitely too slow. We have a new Volcanion, and obviously Baby Volk previously was something to behold. Now this guy is a 120 hit point basic with 2 retreat. It has the Flare Starter attack for 1 fire. You search your deck for a fire energy and attach it to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. However, if you're the player going second on your first turn, you may search your deck for up to 3 fire energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like. So that on a basic going second is really, really insane. It's attachments from deck as well, which is really incredible. So again, me just thinking about this like Jirachi-based heavy switching build. If you're already going to have all these switching effects, you can just play 1 Volk for those situations when you do go second, and you just go, hey, I guess I'm just going to go Flare Starter onto my Charizard and Reshiram, your move. So I can see this being exactly a one-off count in the fire decks because of its acceleration. I don't think it's strong enough for its like first effect in general, especially because it doesn't do any damage. But I love it for its secondary effect. When you are the player going second, you can really kick on and get a lot of energy into play, which is really awesome. We also have the Heat, or High Heat Blow, attack. For 2 fire, you do 50. If there are 4 more energy attached to your Pokemon in play, 60 more damage. I guess it's a reasonable attack as a non-GX attacker. So it could also just be that one-of that you put into your deck as like a Hooper answer if you need to. Then we have a few Littens, Torracats, and an Incineroar. This has the Strong Yell ability. Your Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon before applying weakness and resistance. You can't have more than 1 Strong Yell ability during your turn, so essentially it says it's not stackable. A 160 hit point stage 2 is pretty chunky, and giving yourself an additional 30 is powerful. I think we've seen this previously on a Defiant Fighter Empoleon. It did pretty much nothing ever, but Empoleon was only for basics, and also we do have things like Meganium, and we do have Jirachi, and we have Alolan Ninetales, so it's not that hard to get stage 2s into play, and 30 more damage is a real big buff. That's like a permanent Choice Band on all your guys, on top of Choice Band sometimes, so that damage output is going to be relevant at times, and if there's a deck that can fit it, if you're already a Meganium-based deck that needs more damage output, you can have the 101 line in there. So it's one that I would bear in mind. The one thing I would say, though, is that Defiant Fighter did pretty much nothing in its cycle, and this is an extra 10 damage permanently, and it is 160 hit points, and we are in a time where it's easier to get stage 2s up. That's why I have hope for this card, but previously, Empoleon flopped. From there, we have a very, very awesome Salazzle. Really happy to see Roast Reveal return. Salazzle is a 1 retreat cost, 100 hit point stage 1. With the ability Roast Reveal, once during a turn, you may discard a fire from your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. Again, this sort of synergy package just keeps on giving. Salazzle being able to discard your fires, and then you can use the fire crystal to get them all back into the hand to then weld onto your board. There's just all sorts of fire energy synergy roaming around this deck. I can definitely foresee, again, if we don't go down Jirachi build the other way that you're going to see the Charizard Reshiram deck, it's going to be based on a fixed Salazzle line, and of course we have the option for Salazzle GX in here as well as a late game finishing attacker, especially because Welder powers it up in one turn. So I think the Salazzle is a perfect evolution line in here, whilst at the same time, you know, having this and the GX as an attacking option is incredible. Being able to discard 1, draw 3 is going to be giving you a really powerful draw engine, and I can foresee this being very, very strong. Bear in mind as well that we have Salandits that are psychic type, so we could be playing a Mysterious Treasure based build, and that enables us to play things like Let Loose and have more consistent Lele's for turn 1 to maybe make us Kiawe or Welder that much more often. So Salazzle really is an epic evolution line to have this ability on, and yeah, this ability is just very, very powerful. Next up we have a non-GX Blacephalon. It has 120 hit points. It is an Ultra Beast, and it comes with 2 attacks. Brazier for 1 fighting does 10. You flip over one of your face down prizes. If it's an energy, you do 50 more damage. A little bit random, a little bit difficult to pull off, but it can be early pressure if you really need to. Fireball Circus is slightly more interesting. For 3 fire, you do 50, and you discard any number of fire energy from your hand, and do 50 for each you discarded in this way. Obviously, you are an Ultra Beast, so you could Beast Ring towards this guy, get your Fireball Circus attacking in 1 turn. Equally, you could attach for turn and Welder as well. And if you have more energy in your hand, you could do big bursts of damage. For me, I think it's a little bit awkward. I think if we want non-GX attackers, we would just look towards, like I said, the Volcanion from earlier. Blacephalon does get big damage in key turns. Maybe it's a card in Blacephalon GX as a one-of, but it's going to be rare that you're going to be having lots of fire energy in hand. They're typically wanting to hit the discard pile for your Naggers, or you want them in your deck so you can Beast Ring them out. So I foresee this not quite making the cut in fire decks, but potentially a one-of, who knows. Poliwag has the round and round ability. You can only use this ability if you go second and only on your first turn. Once during your first turn, you may leave your opponent's active Pokemon confused, so it's a small little bit of protection when you are going second, which is fine. The other one has Call for Family. And we have a Poliwrath, which has 150 hit points on a stage 2. That ain't too shabby. It comes with 2 attacks. Knuckle Punch just does DCE 50, and Whirlpool Rush for water DCE does 90. If you have both Poliwag and Whirl on your bench, you do an additional 90, so 180 is good numbers. But overall, lots of evolutions, lots of stipulations. It feels a little bit slow to me, even with the likes of Aqua Patch. It's not quite there. Notably, if this was a 3 colorless cost, I would maybe think it has some more potential just because of triple colorless or boost energy. But I think the fact that it's water and colorless is just too much for me. Then we have Dugong. Dugong is a card that I actually think is really powerful. It's a 120 hit point stage 1 Pokemon. It has 2 attacks. The first is just Tail Whap for DC. You do 60. But we do have the dual Blizzard attack. You discard 2 energy from this Pokemon, and this does 60 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. For 3 colorless, that's very, very efficient. I just mentioned the triple boost energy, which is, you know, going to be synergizing really well with this Dugong. And 260 snipes is really, really good. So often you see Pokemon just going for like 250 snipes and trying to be like just out of range, and we've had to suffice with extra damage buffs from like Giratinas or like Decidueye pings and stuff, but 260 damage snipes is knocking out basics really, really happily. And on top of that, we still have the Giratina, which can be a huge card against, you know, 70 hit point things like Marshallos and Jirachis. So this sniping is powerful. I think it's maybe not something you build a deck around entirely, but it's a potential tech card in some decks because this spread is really, really potent and it can just change games, to be honest. If you can just take out 2 early basics, it's going to be really, really detrimental for the opponent's setup. Then we have an uninteresting Kingler. We have a Stunfisk that can do 30 times the amount... times the number... Let me start again. Zap Trap for a DCE does 30 damage for each of your Pokemon with damage counters on them. This is a small little mini package that we'll see with the Spiritomb that we get in this set as well. Overall, I think this archetype won't really be surviving, even though this has like Volkner, it has Electro Power and a lot of lightning support around it. I think Zap Trap is too easily played around because people can play Spread and ruin the fact that you're damaging your own stuff just by knocking them all out at once. It also is going to be really weak to Muck because a main way that we'll try and damage ourselves will be using the new Spiritomb ability. Other ways we can damage ourselves, like attaching Rainbow Energies, but that feels super slow. Something like a Po Town with some backup evolutions, maybe another way to go. I think Stunfisk overall is probably not going to work out too well, but potentially the Po Town build has some potential behind it just because we could have lots of drawing evolutions in the back and we just power up our Zap Trap, so maybe that's the way to go. But it's a DCE attacker, so that's always something to bear in mind. Next up, we have our next tag team. Alolan, Muck, and Muck are teaming up, and they have a combined hit points of 270 hit points. For a Psychic and double colorless, we have Bad Poison. Your opponent's active is now poisoned. Put 8 counters instead of 1 on that Pokemon between turns. That's a lot of poison damage racking up all at once. Essentially, it's a Psychic DC for 80. If the opponent doesn't deal with it, it's going to continue to do more and more damage. So it does put your opponent on the clock and force them to move out of the active. For me, I think that's really not good when we have Acerola and we have Guzma and we have Zapdos decks that play so many pivoting cards already. I think Bad Poison is a pretty bad attack overall. Then we have Poison Lick for a Psychic and 3 colorless. You do 120 damage. And if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, you heal 100 damage from this Pokemon. So it does play on the fact that he's pretty tanky. It plays on the fact that if something's poisoned, we get this heal and he's just never going to go anywhere. For me, I think 4 energy for 120 is very, very underwhelming. Even though you are Psychic and you have things like Malamar, I can't foresee this being a card that you include in Mali. It feels way too slow for me. And then we have the Sticky Mix GX attack. It is a free 0 energy attack. That's something to bear in mind. It can just be sprung on people all at once. And it just says your opponent's active is now poisoned and paralyzed. If this Pokemon has 4 or more energy attached to it, you put 15 damage counters instead of 1 on that Pokemon between turns for poison. So again, it can be potentially just sprung on the opponent just for a quick poison and paralysis to maybe slow down someone and maybe get them stuck. But again, paralysis is really just unimpactful in a meta where we have Acerolas, Guzmas, all that good stuff. It's so easy for people to get around it, which just makes me think paralysis and poison are very, very weak. And having that commitment to do 15 counters between turns, in my eyes, in a format with all these cards, so often it's going to simply read do 150 damage, and that's something that I don't really like from a GX attack. Overall feels underwhelming to me. Also, the fact that it's weak to Psychic is another like nail in the coffin for it. A Giratina can one-shot this if you Distortion Door onto it first, or even later on, so that's just really bad for you. Next up, we have a powerful ability on a Ghastly. Increase Spite. When this Pokemon is knocked out, search your deck for up to 2 Haunter and put them onto your bench. Shuffle your deck. I really like this, having these things on evolutions. Like I said, when there is just such a reason to play big basics in this format, thanks to tag teams, I like that Pokemon are trying to get creative to make us want to play some evolutions, and abilities like this is a great way to go about it, trying to cheat the evolution rule in different ways. Ghastly having a fantastic ability to get you straight into Haunters, similar to how we see, Water Duplicates being a great card to just get you into evolutions. This increased Spite ability is going to be really awesome if there are strong enough Gengars or Haunters in the game. This Haunter has the Sinister Fog attack. For a Psychic, your opponent's active is now poisoned, and you put 1 counter on each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. We also have another Haunter that for a Psychic does 2 to each of your opponent's Pokemon that already has damage counters on them. So maybe there's some synergy here where we just play a Ghastly Haunter deck, and we're just going to keep constantly evolving up into Haunters, start off with early Sinister Fogs, and then go into the other one. I can't remember its attack name, but it's just more spread-based for just Psychic Energy. We also have spell tags as well that could be introduced into this deck and just be a full-on Ghost spread build. There's also Gengar, the old Gengar that says whenever your opponent attaches an energy to one of their Pokemon, put 2 damage counters onto it. So the fact that we're poisoning, the fact that we're putting damage on each of your opponent's bench, it's, adding up to poison stuff. You can maybe try and play this with Survivor as well if you really want to go heavy on this Haunter as a different direction. It could be reasonable. I can foresee the Ghastly being good enough to push a Haunter-based spread archetype, honestly. I think it may be slightly stronger than Tapu Koko just because we have things like Spell Tag, and that's pretty interesting overall. I think the Haunter dot deck is going to be one I want to play around with. The Gengar that we get in this set has the ability Shadow Pain. You can use this ability once during a turn when you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon. Put 6 counters on your opponent's Pokemon GX and EX in any way that you like. This is kind of the finisher that I was thinking of in the deck. I foresee it being like 4 Ghastly, 4 Haunter, and then maybe like 1 of each Gengar. Potentially 2 of this Gengar, because if we are going for spread, the Shadow Pain is a huge ability just to drop all at once. And it can really help us capitalize on knocking out some big GXs. I think it could be a really cool kind of rogue deck that has a lot of spread potential to it. With Shrine and stuff, we can definitely be punishing EXs and GXs coming into play. You're already a Psychic type, so you get Psychic Lele, and you have Giratina potentially, and you have Spell Tag. So this Psychic spread support thing sounds really cool to me, and I can foresee it being a nice mini engine. Its attack is Twilight Poison, you just do 70, and the opponent's active is Poisoned and Asleep. I don't think you ever power this up to attack with. I think it simply comes into play for Shadow Pain when you're using the Haunters to spread all the other stuff. So I think that's the way to go for this deck. But I think there's something here, you know, so much spread, just all put into one deck at once. It's going to be pretty powerful. And the Spell Tag is a card that I really foresee getting use in a deck like this. Next up, we have Wheezing. This is also pretty interesting at getting some spread going. Detention Gas has the ability, anytime between turns, if this Pokemon is your active, put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's basic Pokemon. So it's kind of like a Shrine of Punishment style effect, but it's exclusively for basics, and they don't have to be GXs. And then it has the Scatter Sludge attack for a DCE. You do 40, and this attack does 20 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that have any damage counters on them. So again, you have that stipulation of having to get damage on them initially anyway, but doing a 20 spread. It's like a powerful version of Flying Flip, with Detention Gas staying in play, getting extra ticks all along. It reminds me of a Tapu Koko plus Shrine combination, but this way it's an ability, and you can still have Shrine on top. So there's ways that this can do even more damage. Again, I harp back to Spell Tag, which can be very, very dangerous in a deck like this that already is doing 20 damage to stuff. Then you have Detention Gas getting out their basics as well. Then you have Spell Tags on top. I can foresee this also being an awkward spreading deck overall. I think spread in general does have to be concerned about the new Mew coming out in this set, especially because this Wheezing is doing damage, whereas this is placing counters, so it gets around the Mew, but this does not, unfortunately. It says damage rather than placing counters, so that's the only thing going against Wheezing overall. But at the same time, you can bring up the Mew and try and knock them out, because you do damage to the active as well, so that's something to bear in mind. So Wheezing seems interesting. I think there's a few different spread tools that I see here, and the fact that the spread cards are Psychic is a really good thing, because you have Spell Tag available to you, so some spreading Psychic stuff to explore for sure. Next up we have Mewtwo. It's a basic with 110 hit points, and it has 2 retreat cost, which is Psychic. It has the ability Mind Report, which is the main selling point here. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may choose a supporter card in your discard pile, show it to your opponent, and put it on top of your deck. We have lots of ways that we can access that card once we put it on top of our deck. We have, you know, Trade, we have Instruct, we have Judge's Whistle, we have all sorts of, we have Acrobike. We have all sorts of different ways to try and get that supporter straight into our hand to instantly use it. So it's kind of like a VS Seeker style effect, but it goes to top of deck instead of immediately to the hand. So it feels like it will only have synergy in decks that have this sort of engine. I can foresee this Mewtwo taking over from something like Palpad in Zoroark decks, because it's so immediate. It's not that you have to go, okay, I'll Palpad, then trade, and hope to hit it, or go Palpad, then Lele to find it. Now we can use the Mewtwo to find it and trade immediately into it, which is very powerful. I think the only downside is, of course, putting Mewtwo's onto your board is not putting more Zoruas onto your board, so there is that slight downside. But potentially we'll see Zoroark decks introducing more Nanu into the list if you go towards this Mewtwo route, because you can have, you know, you put the Mewtwo down, then you Nano it away, and then you can maybe stretch it back the Mewtwo later on. But I think this ability overall is pretty strong. We've seen Delcatty not do too much just yet in the format. It hasn't really impressed. But I can foresee this Mewtwo being a basic, much more accessible and reasonable to play. So I think this is overall a very, very strong card It also has Psycho Shock, which does 70 and isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active, so it can get through some walls. He's like an interesting wall breaker that maybe a Malamar deck could get use out of to just hit through anything. Mew is an interesting basic Pokemon. 60 hit points, weak to Psychic with that 1 retreat cost. With the ability Bench Barrier, sound familiar because it is. Prevent all damage done to your bench Pokemon by damage from your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks. So it's only damage, so you can still place counters around, but it's still protecting you from some big things in the format right now. Getting this is going to be really nice at trying to deal with full blitzing from, tag bolting from Pikachu and Zekroms. And it's also going to be really nice against, some spread style attacks that we have in the format right now as well. So this can maybe lead to the end of a Coco Persimmon based deck. Maybe it'll be Persimmon and other stuff from then on. So this Mew is a really nice card to help out against these spreading things. Obviously the Weezing coming out in this set is one that we keep an eye on. But this Mew is a nice tech card to have back in the format. It's been a little minute where we haven't had a Mr. Mime around, and now we have it in the form of a Mew instead. Onto a Misdreavus and Mismagius. Bear in mind this does have the Dusk Stone available to it, so we can go immediately into Mismagius if we want to. And it has the Mysterious Message ability. Once during your turn, you may knock out this Pokemon. Yikes. If you do, draw cards from your hand until you have 7 in hand. So this feels really awkward. You don't want to ever give up a prize card. We've seen from, Electrode and Electrode GX that you never really want to give up a prize card if you can by knocking out your own stuff. So I think this is overall pretty bad. Knocking out your stuff is not good. We have an Esper and we have a Meowstic. These are all fairly underwhelming. We have our next Tag Team GX Pokemon as we move into the fighting types. Let me just take a quick swig because I've been talking for a while. Marshadow and Machamp have 270 hit points combined, and they have 3 attacks. The first, for a fighting colorless, is simply Revenge, 30, and if any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from your opponent's attack during their last turn, 90 more damage, so 120 is a really good baseline to be hitting. Obviously, this can be a great way to respond on a Pikachu and Zekrom tag team with your own big tag team that can one-shot them for 2 energy, and then the following turn you can go into 100 impact and take another knockout on them. So I think this is a great answer for some full blitzing stuff. Revenge is obviously also very good against Zoroark players, so that's something to bear in mind. I really like that this has a 1 colorless and 1 fighting attack cost. We've seen how Carl Peters played a Zapdos Lycanroc deck in the internationals in Melbourne, and one big thing about using the Lycanroc is that you can use Dance of the Ancients to get that first colorless energy attachment, and then you can use something like Viridian Forest to go ahead and dig out a fighting energy, and boom, you can use Revenge out of nowhere. So I feel like this is a really nice Revenge style attacker. I remember when Terrakion was a big card way back when, just being a Revenge attacker at knocking out some important weaknesses at the time, which was Darkrai. Now we have this important fighting weakness again, and we have a Revenge style attacker that can take one-shots on things and punish them. So I think this card will see play simply for its first attack alone, and the fact that it can transition into 100 impact, doing 160 damage, no strings attached, for an extra attachment for turn the following turn after you use Revenge. And when you have 270 hit points, you're staying around a lot of the time. And if you're just hitting things for weakness and knocking them out, this 100 impact is a great attack to have in your arsenal. It also has the Extremity of Stalwood GX. Don't really know what that means. I imagine it'll change in English. But again, that fighting colorless cost, you do 200. And if this Pokemon has at least 1 extra energy attached in addition to its attack cost, if the Pokemon would be knocked out by damage from an attack during your opponent's next turn, it's not knocked out and its remaining hit points become 10. That's incredible. You give yourself a mini little focus sash, and when you're a 3-prize Pokemon, that's an even bigger deal, because essentially you're saying, I'm taking a big knockout now, and you're not going to be able to respond on this guy, so he's sticking on the board next turn no matter what, and I'll just be able to finish you off with his other attacks later down the line. Obviously, Machamp's a fighting type, so you have Diancie available to you, you have Choice Bands, so this pushes to 1-hit KOs really, really easily. Even its second attack with Choice Band is doing perfect numbers a lot of the time, and his typing is so strong that I can definitely foresee this being good. I think for me right now, the only sort of question mark I have is how you get that number of energy attached to him comfortably without having some dedicated energy acceleration, which doesn't really come to mind right now. So I think that's the only bit of work that we need for the Marshall and Machamp. But overall, I think as a revenge attacker alone, he's the perfect typing, and it's actually fairly easy for us to get him attacking out of nowhere as well, with maybe a Dance of the Ancients here or there, maybe with a counter gain here or there. Stuff like that is the things that come to mind, and that's really powerful. Next up, we have a Diglett. This is one of these cards that has synergy with Giovanni's Exile. Its underground workability says that if this Pokemon is discarded by the effect of Giovanni's Exile, discard the top card of your opponent's deck. So, as well as the fact that you're just getting rid of cards off your board, you're getting this mill effect. So, the Giovanni's Exile mill deck is based around this Diglett and also a Rhydon, or sorry, a Rhyhorn. No, it's a Rhydon. It's a Rhydon that you'll see in the next couple Pokemon. It's down here somewhere. And the idea is you're milling with Digletts and you're also attacking with Rhydon in the active to get extra mills on top. Theoretically, the Giovanni's Exile turn alongside a Rhydon attack can get rid of 7 cards. That's a lot of cards to get rid of. And we obviously have things like Rescue Stretcher to get him straight back into play. And we have lots of Pokemon recovery in general. So potentially there's going to be a milling style deck based on this Giovanni's Exile. For me, I think there's a lot of work for this deck, because if you're spending your supporter for the turn to effectively do nothing in terms of helping you draw cards, get back into DCEs, get back into more replacement Rhydons and such, you're really going to have to be fairly fortunate in order to do that, and I think that's going to be difficult. One good thing for Diglett in particular is that it's a fighting type, so we can be using Rescue Stretcher for its secondary effect, getting 3 back into deck, and use things like Brooklet Hill to get them straight back out, so that's pretty interesting. So it's good that this is a fighting type Pokemon, because it makes the Giovanni's Exile kind of loop a little bit better. There's also a Dugtrio, which has got some people talking, simply because, again, it's a fighting type, and that's always something to bear in mind when there's Pikachu and Zekrom, as well as Zoroark around. It has the home ground attack. It does 30. If you have a stadium in play, 60 more damage. So we were talking about that Fighting Dojo stadium earlier. This could be a great way to improve your damage output with this card, as well as stuff like Shrine of Punishment, Brooklet Hill, stuff like that. Other things that you'd look for. Alongside Diancie, you're doing really, really good numbers and knocking out stuff that's fighting weak. Obviously, Pikachu and Zekrom can tech in weakness policy, as can Zoroark. It's been done before. So this is an entirely unimpressive card when you're not up against stuff that's weak to fighting. And even if you are up against those decks, they can tech for you. So I think it's going to end up being like Crabominable, where it doesn't actually see too much play as an attacker. Next up we have a Marowak, which is pretty uninspiring overall, punishing some tool attachments. Here comes the Rhyhorn and Rhydon. I think quick note on the Rhyhorn, this is one that has 80 hit points and 1 less retreat cost than the one that we currently have in format, so potentially it overtakes stuff in the Meganium Mill deck. But then we also... Oh, there's one that has 90 hit points as well, so more hit points is good. We'll take that one instead, even though it has 4 retreat cost. Here's the Rhydon. It's a 110 hit point stage 1, which is pretty bulky to be fair, and it has the attack Dirty Work for a DCE. You discard the top card of your opponent's deck, but if you play Giovanni's Exile from your hand during this turn, you discard the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck instead. Getting rid of 5 cards is pretty nutty. We've seen it from a GX attack, from a Magcargo GX. Getting rid of 5 cards is a big burst, and the fact that you can do this multiple times is pretty dangerous. We've seen Charizard GX be used to discard 10 all in one turn. The fact that we can do this dirty work throughout the game for 5 card mills is very, very scary and worrying. Another thing that we have to bear in mind is that Rhydon evolves into Rhyperior, and Rhyperior is another card that can mill cards from the opponent's deck. So I can definitely foresee there being just a quad Rhydon Rhyperior deck that's using Giovanni's and Digletts to try and really just mill the deck as quickly as possible. As I said, we're going to have to try and find a way to draw cards without our support of a turn, so potentially looking at things like Jirachi and such to draw us cards during our turn before we use the Giovanni's, or even have some sort of backup draw engine of like Swampert, Meganium once again. These are the things that I would be looking towards, but these do take up bench spaces and it makes your Digletts a little bit less reliable. So there's a few things to figure out for this deck. Still a little bit clunky because Giovanni's being a supporter card is a big downside. We want to be using draw supporters most turns to make sure we can keep getting DCEs and evolutions going for this mill deck. But I can see people trying at the very least, which is definitely fun. This Rhyperior doesn't have discarding synergies, so I imagine it won't be seeing play, otherwise it's just too slow. We have the introduction of baby Pokemon for the first time in a long time. Now they actually can't evolve into their regular evolutions because they have nothing that states the fact that they're babies on here. They just count as basic Pokemon, so these can never evolve, which is a little bit sad for them. It kind of defeats the object of them being baby Pokemon, but they all come with a similar theme. The theme of these cards are you can flip a coin and get an effect. If the coin is heads or tails, your turn still ends. So the idea behind these guys is just trying to... I don't know, I don't really get the theme. I think overall these cards are all very, very weak just because it's a flip effect that always ends your turn. But regardless, let's have a look at Tyrogue in particular. He has a retreat cost of 0, which is nice, 60 hit points, and the ability Playful Kick. Once during your turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, put 3 counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Either way, your turn now ends. That's really, really terrible. Flipping a coin and ending your turn guaranteed is just awful. Sometimes you do nothing and your turn's ended, and regardless, you're never able to attack. And I imagine almost every attack you can think of does more than placing 3 counters on one of your opponent's guys, so that's really, really terrible. Next up, we have a Landorus. It's a fighting type with 120 hit points. It has 2 attacks, 30 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. That's kind of fine. Especially because it can be to the active, so it can hit for weakness on stuff. And Power Cyclone for fighting colors does 60. Move energy from this Pokemon to one of your benched. It's pretty efficient and reasonable. Feels like a reasonable non-GX attacker in general. His damage output isn't too high, but you have the damage buffs that you have to think about, and he can actually push his way to knocking out Zoroark for 2 energy, so that's something to bear in mind. We have a Crabrawler and a Crabominable, which brings back the fight alone mechanic, which is a mechanic that I kind of liked seeing. It was overall unimpressive on the Lucario that we initially had, but this fight alone is now on a 140 hit point stage 1, which is more chunky and difficult to deal with, and it has a DCE cost, whereas the previous fight alone was a metal colorless, which is way more difficult. So this seems like a much easier deck to try and achieve and build. It's also, once again, on a fighting type, so you have the Brooklet Hills to get out extra basics. Obviously, you don't want to put too many basics into play, but it's something that we can try and bear in mind. Fight alone doing 30 damage. If you have fewer Pokemon in play than your opponent, you do 60 more for each Pokemon you have fewer in play. This could end up synergizing with the Gloom that we saw earlier. Gloom flipping coins and making the opponent put more basics down just makes your fight alone do a lot of damage. And again, the fact this is a fighting type that attacks for a DC is promising. You don't need to have too much of a differentiation in bench for you to be knocking out the likes of Zoroarks and Pikachu and Zekroms. I think the fact that this guy has 140 hit points as well is pretty chunky and annoying for some Zapdos-based decks. So I have hope that we can fight alone with this guy. It seems pretty reasonable. Next up, we have the Murkrow and Honchkrow. Again, bear in mind we can use Dusk Stone to try and evolve these immediately. The Murkrow lets you choose a card randomly from your opponent's hand, and then they shuffle it back into their deck just for some random disruption. And we have the Honchkrow GX. That is a 210 hit point GX stage 1. Weakness to Lightning is definitely awkward when there's Pikarom and Jolteon GX around. But it does come with 2 attacks and an ability. The ability has got a lot of people talking. It's Ruler of the Night. As long as this Pokemon is your active, your opponent can't play any Tool, Special Energy, or Stadium cards from their hand. And it reads pretty much the same as Chaos Wheel that we saw on Giratina EX to great effect for a long time. The fact that this is on an ability is very, very strong. Denying people big chunks of their deck, especially energy cards. That's the big outlier. Stopping DCE is such a huge factor here. And there are some like Zapdos decks out there right now which are very reliant on rainbow energies as well, so stuff like that is going to be really awkward for them. Really, this ability is phenomenal and it can shut down decks overall. You know, there are plenty of decks out there that are just based on like DCE counter energy as well, so stuff like that is really difficult to get around. It has the Feather Storm attack as well, which isn't too shabby. It does for a Dark DCE 90 and 30 to 2 of your opponent's benched GX or EX. So it's similar to old Night Spear, but you get potentially hitting 2 targets. There's obviously the downside of if you're up against a non-GX deck, you're just doing 90 to the active, and that's terrible damage output. Probably too weak against non-GXs overall. But if you're up against GXs, you're setting up some nice math for yourself. And then finally, you have the unfair GX attack. Your opponent reveals their hand, and you discard 2 cards from it. That is genuinely very, very unfair. I think this card is potentially a problem card simply because we have Dusk Stone DCE Unfair GX as an attack available to us. If your opponent does not have 3 high-quality cards, 3 supporter cards, or 3 drawing cards, they're just going to be in trouble. And the fact that you can do this alongside a Let Loose, that's genuinely unfair GX. It sounds really, really sad and hard to get around. I think this GX attack is genuinely a problem and feels very not fun or interactive to deal with. Sounds like a real problem. If you're not playing your own Orangaroos or stuff like that, it feels like kind of like Delinquent-esque. It feels like Red Card Delinquent is coming back into the game, this time in the form of a Honchkrow GX attack, and I think that's really, really bad and ugly. So I think it's a very, very powerful early game play. Also, it can be a great late game play if you think that your opponent's a turn away from winning. You can unfair GX, their crucial cards out of their hand, and it's going to be terrible for them. I think the Honchkrow could end up being one of these things that you evolve from Ditto in Zoroark decks. Could be nice in mirror matches because you deny the opponent from putting down special energies a lot of the time. Or at least force them to Guzma first, and then they're never hitting into the Honchkrow, and Featherstorm doing 90-30-30 can set up, Zoroarks for Ritis beating range, or it can set up Lele's especially, so I think that attack's really good. I can foresee this going in Zoro for sure. It helps you cover your fighting weakness because this has fighting resist. And I think overall that's the home I see for this card. I don't see it being a full-on just quad Honchkrow deck unless it's going to focus more on the unfair GX attack and having more sort of hand disruption tools at its disposal. I think that's really where I see this card seeing play. But overall, its ability is strong. Its GX attack seems very boring and sad to deal with, and that's just going to win games on its own. We have the Spiritomb, which I mentioned earlier when talking about the Stunfisk. It has the Building Spite ability. Once during a turn, you may put 1 damage counter on this Pokemon. So this is simply the easiest way to get your Stunfisk rolling. You just spend a load of Nest Balls getting lots of Spiritomb out, put a damage counter on each of them, and then suddenly you're doing, 120 damage if you have 4 Spiritomb damaged on them, just out of nowhere. And if you can get damage on your other stuff, that's extra bonus damage for you as well. So it's obviously weak to Muck, and it's, not great having 60 hit point Pokemon damaging themselves too often. But I think overall it's pretty much the synergy card that Spiritomb is going to go alongside the Stunfisk, and that sounds pretty interesting. It also has the Anguished Scream attack that does for a dark 10 and 30 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So if you put the full 5 damage counters on him, you can do 160, 190 with choice bands. So that's actually a great way to knock out some GXs. So if he's left around to just build Spite the whole time, you can actually knock out some stuff, which is pretty fun and interesting. But overall, I think this may not be the best way to play it alongside Stunfisk. I think it may be a full Po-Town based deck that's going to be the best way to go. But at the same time, if you have your evolutions and no Po-Town, things get ugly. It feels like a old Gyarados deck, the one that had to play Magma base. It feels like you can draw things in the wrong sequence and then you're just going to not be able to play stuff. But in the right circumstances, that Stunfisk is going to be doing a lot of damage. So potentially it's a deck worth pursuing, and overall a pretty interesting ability from the Spiritomb. Next up we have Sandile, Crocodile, and Krokorok. Not too much to mention here. Same thing for the Jigglypuff and the Wigglytuff. Nothing too inspiring. Cleffa is one of these baby Pokemon. It has the Hustle Draw ability. Previous Cleffas obviously always known for helping you draw cards. This one says flip a coin if heads, shuffle your hand and draw 6. But either way, you end your turn. So it's really, really bad compared to all Cleffas, and all these basic, all these baby Pokemon abilities are just terrible in general. Just really, really awkward. Speaking of coin flips, we have this Whimsicott GX, which is again one of these Pokemon that I just really don't want to deal with. It sounds so awkward. It's a 190 hit point stage 1 fairy type GX, which is a little bit squishy overall, but it makes up for that with its fluffy cotton ability. If any damage is done to this Pokemon by attacks, flip a coin if heads, prevent that damage. So half the time you're not getting hit, which is just really awkward to deal with, and a deck that's going to be fully based on this is going to be very awkward. We've seen Cincino, back from early black and white sets, have this ability, and it ended up just being a deck because sometimes you don't get hit and that's good enough. Fortunately though, Whimsicott's attacks aren't that strong. Energy Blow does 10 and 30 more for each fair energy attached to it, so it feels kind of weird. You're like having to commit a bunch of energy to this guy, and then if they flip heads, you lose. Sorry, if you flip tails, you lose. If you flip heads, you're just going to keep winning. So it feels really stupid. You're basically putting your entire deck on your own coin flips, which just sounds bad and dumb. Toy Box GX searches a deck for up to 5 cards and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck afterwards. I mean, it's nice. There is only really Judge and Let Loose to get around this, but at the same time, you're not doing much damage, and you're only a Stage 1 Pokemon. It shouldn't be too hard to get set up without the help of Toy Box, but if you're bricking, it's something you can bear in mind. Overall, I think it won't really formulate a deck, because although its ability is very strong, its attack is just so weak that you have to overcommit to this card, and then you're basically just like, please flip heads, otherwise you lose. So that's pretty dumb. Maybe you could play some sort of Wishful Baton build with it, who knows. Next up we have Meowth and Persian. It has the Cat's Gathering ability. Each of your Pokemon in play with Cat Day attack pay no energy to use their attacks. So this can attack for free, this Meowth, but not too much of a big deal. Artwork appreciation, 10 out of 10. Same for the Persian, I think that looks awesome as well. But we have an actually slightly more interesting Persian GX. It has 200 hit points as a Stage 1, and it has the Catwalk ability, which I'm personally a big fan of. Once during your turn, if your Pokemon GX or EX was knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack during their last turn, you may search a deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So it's similar to like an old Teammates effect that we've had in format. Being specific to EX and GX is slightly bad for you, because it means you'll probably only be able to use this ability a maximum of 2 times, because, you know, if you've had 3 GXs knocked out, you've lost the game. And there'll be situations where you haven't evolved your Persian before they've taken their first couple prizes, which is awkward. But the fact that you can just grab any 2 cards is huge. That's so nuts. It basically just says, oh, you got something knocked out. Go ahead and grab the cards that just gets you the response KO straight away, or lets you rebuild your board. I think this ability is amazing for consistency, and it may be seen in decks just as, again, like a Ditto evolution or something of that sort, just because of this ability. Also, you have to bear in mind we have the old Make 'em Pay Persian as well that we got from the previous set, and maybe that could be like a 2-2 package in certain decks, just because this ability is nice to follow up, and the Make 'em Pay attack can be nice against mill strategies and Zoroark strategies and stuff. It also has 2 attacks for 3 colorless energy. Revenge does 10 and 20 more damage for each Pokemon in your discard pile, a maximum of 9 Pokemon. So I'm really happy to see the like Be Revenge style attack come back in this sort of variation. You do 10 initial damage, and then going up to 9 Pokemon means that you go up to 190, and that's not a bad number at all. We have Choice Band support, and we have a good number of cards that can discard from hand right now with Treasures and Ultra Balls and Acrobikes. We have a lot of ways that we can discard stuff, and the fact that this Persian will keep you very consistent is very nice, because a Persian goes down, you can use Catwalk and just go ahead and get yourself the stuff for your next Persian. You can get yourself a DCE, you can get yourself, you know, like Counter Gain or something like that if you really need to. So I can foresee there being a world where this is just a quad Persian-based deck, similar to how we've seen Vespiquen. But the fact that it's 3 colorless energy is a little awkward. We have the triple boost energy, though, that you have to bear in mind, so maybe that's the way we get around it. You know what? Triple boost energy is such a good card. I want the Persian deck to work. I want this to be the new Vespiquen. Make it happen, game. Oh, yes. Catwalk our way to victory. Such a sick ability. I want to build around this card, because that ability is nuts, and if your stuff isn't getting knocked out, you don't mind that. You're still pretty happy. So overall, I like the Persian GX, and the fact that you can have Make 'em Pay as an option in the deck as well to help you out against Mill and Zoro is just a really good deal for me. So I like it. Persian, let's go. Let's become the new deck. You're the new Vespiquen. I'm happy. It also has the Slashback GX attack, which is basically a carbon copy of the Golisopod GX attack, doing 150 and switching this to one of your bench. This can also be really nice. You can simply just do this to skew prize trade in late game when you're up against stuff that has already taken a couple GX knockouts. You can just throw a non-GX into the active and say, hey, deal with this instead, which is a pretty nice deal. So that ain't too shabby, especially because, again, Choice Band pushes you to knock out the good old Lele's, so that's something to bear in mind. We have Doduo, Dodrio, nothing too important. We have Porygon, Porygon 2, and the Porygon Z, which is a very interesting card indeed. It has the ability Crazy Code, and this allows you to attach special energy from your hand as often as you like to any of your Pokemon. And special energy are the best energy to be playing, obviously. DCE is insane. You basically play Porygon Z exactly for DCE, and then fill your deck with other slightly helpful or anything useful special energy at all. It's like Rain Dance, but for exactly special energy. So the idea is you fill your deck entirely with special energy, you get your Porygon Z down, and you start spamming them all into play and building all sorts of crazy attacks going. I can foresee this being a pretty fun deck where you're kind of toolbox based with all these special energies within it. You can have lots of rainbows, you can have all these units and blends and have different attackers for different situations. And because you have this sort of Rain Dance, you can get the right attacker going very, very often, which is really awesome. And the fact that we have, basically because we have DC alone, like if you're just doing this to literally just go, I'll attach a DC for free, that value is insane. That's honestly so nuts. So I'm excited to see this. It's a new twist on Rain Dance, and it's definitely a crazy card to sort of keep up with, because I can definitely see there being some Porygon toolbox style decks. It sounds a little clunky, obviously, and you can be punished for playing lots of special energy, obviously, as well. But overall, it's definitely something that I want to try and build around. And finally, we just have the Snorlax, which can hit 180 on tag teams, and it has 150 hit points itself. So it's a pretty annoying non-GX that's exactly good against tag teams, but 180 is not perfect numbers for a tag team anyway, a lot of the time. So I don't think he's going to see play for much, other than the fact that he has big chunky hit points. And then there's a Happiny that can flip to heal 60, but your turn ends either way, so that's awful. And we have the Chatot, which is like a terrible reprint of the old Chatot because you have to attach energy to him, whereas the previous one did Mimic for free and had free retreat. So it's way, way worse than old Chatot. Seems bad, except for the fact that he has 10 more hit points. I think that's the only thing. But yeah, that wraps up Double Blaze. I think there's definitely some interesting cards from this set. The fire stuff is the big takeaway because the red shard and the fire crystal. I was calling it red shard for a long time. I can't remember why. The welder and the fire crystal seem to be the standout cards. I think there's the interesting Giovanni's Exile based deck that we're going to try and build for mill approaches. There's the Honchkrow GX, which seems to be very powerful. The Porygon Z sort of toolbox style deck sounds interesting to build around. I'm going to play some Persian just because it's a throwback to Vespiquen and it has its own inbuilt consistency with Catwalk to help you pull out triple energies. And from there, is there anything else? There's this Stunfisk kind of deck that we're going to try and build. Like I said, the Exile Rhyperior deck. The Marshmallow Machamp is a good standalone GX card that will just be sometimes a one-off index. Getting back Bench Barrier is amazing. Getting back Mewtwo to recover recover supporters is a huge card. Weezing and Gengar Haunter, thanks to this Ghastly, pretty much makes it potentially relevant as a spreading archetype. The Muck feels bad to me. The Dugong's interesting. And the Salazzle is absolutely busted. Man, this card is one of the best cards in the set as well. Definitely awesome. And this Charizard seems to be the new face of fire decks for Welder and Kiaweeing onto, which is just pretty potent in general. So yeah, a lot of interesting stuff from Double Blaze. Let me know what you guys think. Comment below if I got anything wrong the whole time. I know I went on a tangent about Persimmon when talking about that stadium, but I eventually got there and figured it out. But yeah, I've been talking for a long time. I need to lie down. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video soon. Cheers.